So, performance reviews are dreaded by your employees, avoided by managers, or only completed when HR chases people down. But companies still insist that they matter. What is really happening? Have you ever left a performance review thinking, that was such a waste of time? Then this conversation is for you. David Cohen is back. He's a business leader and founder of DS Cohen and Associates. And by the end of this episode, you're going to learn why traditional performance reviews feel disconnected from real work. You're going to learn why they persist even when everyone knows that they're flawed. And you're going to learn practical changes you can implement now to make your current system stronger, more human, and more effective. So if you care about the performance review and you want to know more, stick around because we are going to tell you all the things. So David, welcome. Let's jump right in.
So this is a hot topic, so let's hopefully help some people out.
I'm excited. You're getting fired up. So tell us about why are performance reviews so universally dreaded by both managers and employees? I remember I hated them. I would look forward to it, but I always left disappointed. I don't know. There's just a lot.
There's a lot going on. I think that some of the reasons are the ratings sometimes are not clear. They're a moving target, so people, get surprised. I think that, surprise is the enemy of people's feeling confident. So it generates a lot of anxiety, or managers just have a recency effect and they only remember what you did for them last week and they forget the other things. And if it's a negative thing you forgot, then you get really defensive. And therefore, the conversation is a time bomb waiting to happen. And if the process, you know, reliably triggers fear, people, you know, optimize sort of self-protection and not performance. So they're not really about performance reviews, they're about answering that question why. So as soon as a manager asks the question why about something that happened, and what happened wasn't positive necessarily, then it's about catching people doing something wrong, and people get really defensive and it raises anxiety. So
Right.
people really don't want to get involved with it.
Um, so what emotions do reviews usually trigger?
Well, the emotions, the first question, which I said, that question of why did you do something originally triggers it. The other thing that triggers it is that the people have had no review. I don't have time for this. Managers will set up a review and then they'll delay it because something came up. And the message, whether intended or not, is my direct report really doesn't count. Something else counts.
Mhm.
And if something else counts, I don't count. Therefore, why should I be engaged? Why should I be committed? Why should I be held accountable if my manager's not held accountable to talk to me on time? So there becomes a whole series of a sort of a drain circling the drain, spiral circling the drain, and people just don't feel good about it.
Yeah. I think some people treat it as like in my past, I'm using a personal experience. I remember I was working at a law firm and the owner, he was doing the performance reviews, but he wasn't my direct report. And I walked in and he said, you took a long lunch one time. And that was like all he said to me. And I was like, what? Like that was my performance review. And I was like, so you're sitting here and you're pulling on the one thing that I don't even know what it was. I did wrong, I guess, or against the rules, but there was nothing to do with what I did right. There's nothing to do with the work that I was doing. It was like completely unrelated to my actual job position. Is that normal?
Unfortunately, historically, it has been that people will find things that are not related. And I think that's one of the big problems. People be put everything in the kitchen sink in the performance review, even if it's not job related. Um, it's really interesting. I did an exercise once where I divided the group in half, and I told the one group that they were the salespeople going in for the performance review, but they've been late a few times and they're not producing the work they're supposed to produce. But this time you're late. And the reason you're late is that you stopped on the highway and you saved the child's life by doing something. That was them. The managers, we told, the person's been late, he's not hitting numbers, and you're under pressure. So you got to read him the riot act if you don't let him, or let him go. So the
Right.
biggest mistake is nobody inquired like why the person was late. So
Right.
they just started to attack them instead of opening in a conversation. And when they found out, when the person finally said, told them about the highway story, they usually felt pretty bad about attacking them. So
Right.
the whole performance review process is this dance that nobody wants to attend. And so they're hoping they don't get picked to dance, but you got to show up. And if it was something which was flowed and was natural, HR wouldn't have to be the bad guys that are always chasing after managers to have them completed on time. And the other thing is that we always people look up the organization for see the behaviors their boss is doing, so they emulate those behaviors. So if their boss doesn't do it on them, they figure, well, why should I do it with my direct reports? Because traditionally, most of it feels like an ambush. During the
Hmm.
year, you might have done these things that weren't necessarily successful, but the manager didn't have the courage or felt they didn't have the time to talk to you about it. So all of a sudden, at the year's end, they pull out their drawer full of these notes about everything you did wrong. And so you feel like it's a year-end ambush. Well,
Yeah.
nobody wants to be ambushed. So they find that it's really not healthy when people have high anxiety because productivity goes down, retention becomes an issue, the employee experience is negative. There's a lot of ripple effect with performance reviews.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I guess my question then is that how do you modernize a performance review or make them effective? Like, what are some ways to do that? Because I remember like another time where another performance review started with that person opening a drawer and pulling out like a notebook and saying, "This is your name and this is all my notes about you." And I was like, all right. And I mean, it is terrifying. Like your
Yeah.
job is essentially on the line, your raise is on the line. It's like if I did well in that review, I get a raise, right? So when it's related to your livelihood and like what you're putting effort in, it is really anxiety causing, right? So how do you modernize performance reviews?
Well, you hit upon a couple of interesting points. The first one is one of the reasons they don't work is because they are tied to compensation and they are tied to raises. So the first thing is to separate it from that. Now, everybody says they can't do that, but there are ways of doing that. And, I was once working with a company and I said to the head of HR and the CEO, I said, we've got this great process going, but separate the compensation discussion. Make it 6 months separated from the performance review, annual review, so they don't see the compensations directly related to how they're doing. So they have the freedom to do a good job and not get anxious about it because once you get a bonus year after year, it's kind of a fixed thing and you expect it. And if you don't
Yeah.
get it, you didn't know you weren't going to get it, that really becomes anxious because most people spend it before they have it. So I said, separate it. They didn't for various reasons. He then went off to one of the major schools to get a executive MBA in talent management. And he came back and he laughed. And I said, why? He said, I did the case study on our performance review and I got a 95. When I asked the professor, why did I get 100? What was missing? What was the missing point? He said, you should have separated the performance reviews from compensation.
Oh, wow.
So, so he said, I knew in theory that's a great idea, but in reality, it doesn't work. But there are organizations that have separated. And, it's that bonus is a big deal to people, even though it's part of their annual, they see it as part of their annual salary. So they kind of plan for it, especially if they don't work too hard to get their results. So it's something which I believe has to be rethought. That's one thing that has to be rethought. The other thing is, as we said, it's I'm going to catch you by surprise when I talk to you, or I only talk to you if I do something wrong. Well, if I
Mm-hmm.
only talk to you when I do something wrong, that anxiety, that anticipation of, you caught me doing something wrong is going to create that defensiveness, that anxiety. So, how do you change that? Is you convert feedback to feed forward. What do I mean
Okay.
by that? What that is, instead of talking about what you did wrong, talk about what you can do to be successful. So the
Mm.
conversation doesn't take too long. It takes like 10 minutes, maybe even less. And it's how are you doing? Are you making progress? What help do you need? Where are your obstacles? What's the things that I can do to help you be successful? And say, going forward, here are some ideas, here are some suggestions, and give the individual the autonomy to take the action the way they want and then follow up with them. How is it going? So if there were check-ins every 90 days for 10 minutes with people, and those check-ins are documented, and you see the people through you helping them. The other thing that I think is managers feel that they have to rely on themselves to do coaching. And usually there's people on the team that are masters at what they do. They're great at what they do. What's wrong with acknowledging that by saying to a direct report, Sally has been really good at this. She's been doing this. She's surprising everybody. She's doing a great job. What I want to do is hook you up with Sally so she can help you be successful. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it, it's kind of like, the Olympic athlete. When the Olympic athlete trains, they visualize success. They
Mm-hmm.
don't visualize failure. So they're always thinking forward and they're always saying, what can I do differently to be successful? But yet in performance reviews, we keep talking about, well, this is what you didn't do to make it successful, instead of talking about, here's some ideas what you can do. So feed forward would be one. The other is during those conversations to check that the goals haven't changed. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
organizations, for a lot of reasons, will change the person's goals, sometimes without telling them, and will,
Yeah.
shift the accountability, shift it. So, while the annual goal setting process gives some stability to the organization, or it assumes stability, the reality is that goals do change. So if goals change, the person has to know about it. What they're doing has to change. Their focus has to change. And, it's impossible for the person to know that if you're not telling them. So at
Mm-hmm.
that check-in period, check the goals are still the same. Check that, something might have happened in the business and the company's got more aggressive. Maybe something happened, they got less aggressive. Who knows? But let the person know. And the other thing is on the annual goals, sometimes they're set and they're ambiguous. They're not quantifiable. So what happens is somebody, people will compare notes after performance reviews are over, and they both got pretty much the same results, but one person got a bonus at this, the other person got less of a bonus, and they're kind of scratching their head because the individual bias is kicked in of the manager, where the manager found one thing the other person wasn't doing, or doesn't like that person, or whatever it might be. So when you set goals, set a range. Say, this is what we need to do. You need to do this for us to stay in business. And if we do exceptionally well and the stars, the moon all line up, this is what we're going to do. Anything between that is meeting expectations. You know, if you go above that, we'll exceed expectations. And the other
Right.
thing that people make a mistake on is they measure behaviors about meet and exceed expectations. And this is sort of my, pet peeve, because I keep thinking about, if you're supposed to talk nicely to people and behave in a certain way, or listen to people until they finish presenting an idea without interruption, you're supposed to do that 100% of the time.
Right.
But yet the performance review has this 5-point scale that has meets and exceeds, or
Mm,
meets and outstanding. Well, in other words, meets is I do it 80% of the time and I upset 20% of the people by not doing it, or is meets I do it 100% of the time. And so if
right.
I do it 100% of the time, I'm doing my job. So while yes, you can, for quantifiable objectives that are easy to measure, easy to understand, there can be a doesn't meet, meets, and exceeds. For behaviors, people have to get away from this meets and exceeds. Sometimes they'll say, well, if you're doing the behaviors associated with another job, you exceed. Well, you're not doing the other job. Why are you measured on it? Because that's unfair to other people who are just doing their job and doing it excellently. So
Right.
they have to stop giving this behavior review based on the traditional scale. And the other thing that is, important is when they do their micro notes at the end of a quarterly period, they should document that so the
Hmm.
person knows. And at the end of the year, the performance review, and I've done this with organizations, take 5 minutes. Of course, it's not a review, it's just a summary of the previous 4 sessions where you're at. And
Right.
therefore, based on that, we set new goals, new objectives, have new projects, etc. So those are some of the things that managers need. Some managers are going to need a script to do this. They all need training, not e-training, but true interactive training so they can actually do it with a live person. Because I can do it really well in front of a mirror, but when I get in front of an audience, I don't do it so well necessarily. So you do it online, you answer all the questions right, but you weren't in the anxiety of a real interaction with another human being. And
Right.
so while you might have a tendency to do it, there's no guarantee. So it has to be role played. It has to be deliberate. It can't be, well, it's easy and it saves us money because we can do it on e-learning. There's things like performance reviews, things like especially interviewing. Those things need live training in order to be effective.
Yeah. Why does HR or why do managers hate performance reviews so much? Like why do they avoid them? Like what is the issue?
Well, first of all, they have to tell the truth.
So
And
is it communication? Is it like people have a hard time being honest?
yeah, people have a heart. If I, I'm afraid of their reaction. I'm
Right.
afraid of they might be upset. And I don't want to upset them because they're working on a really important project. And if I upset them, they're not going to necessarily focus, not be successful. There's I might cause them to um, argue with me. I don't want to get in an argument with them. Stop asking the question, why did you do it? You won't get in an argument. Um, so the the problem is that managers, therefore, because they don't tell the truth, and I so frequently hear, well, I want to keep them and I got to find a way of giving them a bonus. So I'll give them this, this, and this. So they fit the performance review to meet the expectation of the employee. That's
Mm,
why I've been known to say that there are two places in the corporate world where there's great fiction writing. One is on resumes and the other is on performance reviews, because people don't want to, they're afraid of being honest. When in fact, if the person is failing at the job, if the person is basically has that anxiety, is unhappy, you're giving them a gift by being honest with them and saying, you're not a good fit for this role. Maybe there's another role in the organization where you are a good fit, or you're not a good fit for this company because you have the wrong behaviors. So
Right.
I'm going to give you a gift and say to you, you know, let's help you find a job somewhere where you're going to be happy and not here because you're holding us back from being successful. So
Right.
honesty, from that point of view, it's a hard thing to do, especially because you're sitting in front of somebody and it's their livelihood and they've got kids, they got a mortgage, they got parents that might be in a home, God knows what. And all of this is human nature. If you have a heart, if you have some level of emotional intelligence, you're thinking about those as the manager. And therefore, I kind of hold back from telling them what they need to hear. I tell them about what they need to hear, and I couch it in a way that hopefully they'll misunderstand the message, be happy, and not retaliate.
Right. It's like skirting around the issue.
Right. And that's what a lot of managers do because they do lack training in how to have these conversations. They do lack training in how to have it's more than a difficult conversation. I mean, it's real popular to give people training on how to have difficult conversations. But it's more than that. It's how to have honest conversations that are difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I also remember after or around performance review time, I was always told to never share what my bonus was or to never talk about that. What are your thoughts on that? Because in my thought, what I'm thinking is like if we were able to share what each employee in an organization gets, maybe it would motivate more people to want to perform better. I don't know. It would increase morale, in my opinion, but having it secretive to me, I don't know. I don't know how I felt about that.
Well, it might be secretive, but reality is people tell each other. So
Yeah.
it's not really a secret. So you can pretend it's a secret the same way that kids in school are told by their teacher, your report card's between you, me, and your parents. Don't share it with anybody. And then bell rings and they're on the bus. And by the time they get to the bus, everybody in the class knows everybody else's report card. So we're used to
Like, how
sharing that
awkward
kind
is
of
it if you
information.
ask your colleague, "Oh, what kind of bonus did you get?" And they're like, "Oh, I got $10,000." And they ask you, and you're like, "Oh, I only got five."
Yeah. It's like, or yeah, I got a bonus. The other person I didn't get a bonus.
Yeah.
Or I got my COLA cost of living increase, and the other person says, yeah, I got that plus. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't even have to be. I have this strange view of this that organizations at the beginning of the year budget knowing that they're going to give out bonuses, knowing that that's there. So they've already prepared for that and they have it in the budget. So get rid of bonuses altogether and pay people what they deserve. Give them the salary based as if the bonus is there. And if they're not working out, they're not performing, tell them they don't have the right to keep their job. So they're going to look somewhere else because we're going to find somebody who earned the right to have the job.
Yeah.
And I would take away the whole thing. But here's the other problem with performance reviews and how people coach their direct reports. There are two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is because I want to be number one in the group, or I want to get this financial benefit, or I want this, that, or the other thing. And then there's intrinsic motivation. What do I want to make me a better person? What's going to
hmm
make me feel good? I was many years ago working with a mutual fund company that gave out to the brokers that hit a certain level, they gave out a bonus. They all do, every mutual fund company. The bonus for 90% of them was usually a trip to Disneyland for them and their family and kids. And how many trips to Disneyland can they take? I mean, after all, especially if you have young kids and they start screaming and you hate it. So it had a negative ripple effect. This company did something different. They
Mm,
said that bonus might be 10,000, 20,000, $50,000. You pick a charity in your community and we will come and do a whole big celebration and get the local press involved and have you give them that check in honor of you making, you know, us successful and you successful.
right.
And I can tell you, in talking with the brokers in the community, that motivated them more than anything else. That was that
Wow.
intrinsic motivation where they felt proud that they could help these organizations instead of taking another trip to Disney or another ski vacation to Vail or whatever, or go on another cruise or go to a all-inclusive resort in Hawaii. Those things are nice, you know, and you can brag about them, and everybody at work says, "Oh, how was it?" And you feel really good bragging about it, and make everybody else miserable. It's that, that competition idea. I was once with one of the CEOs of one of the big brokerage firms of one of the banks, and we're walking around the broker area, and he said, "You see that brochure on that guy's desk, young man? It was a brochure for Rolls Royces." He says, "I want to make sure he's in debt all the time, so he's always motivated to sell more. I'm encouraging him to buy a Rolls Royce." I said, I said to him, I said, that's not the best way of motivating him. And we talked about it. He didn't change his mind because that was how he grew up in the business. It's about always chasing the next golden ring instead of
Right.
doing something good for yourself and for others. So I think that the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and if you ask most managers, what motivates somebody? What is the intrinsic driver of that individual? Most managers I've asked that don't even know. They don't know their
Mm,
staff that well. So they can't use that. So it's about sitting down and getting to know your staff and getting to personalize that relationship and being able to draw on their intrinsic desires, not their extrinsic desires. I think that'd be a big plus to change the way
yeah.
performance reviews are done.
There was one job that I had where we got to choose a bonus or half Fridays in the summer. And I love that. I was all for the half Fridays in the summer. I'm like, you can keep your money. I want to be off work at noon on Friday so I can enjoy the beautiful weather. Because, as you know, in Canada, here in Manitoba, it gets wretched cold in the winter. So having that extra time was amazing. And so I would choose that over money any day. So I agree. I think every individual has a different motive, and other people took the money because they whatever reason they had for that. But I do believe everyone should be treated individually in terms of motivating.
Yeah, what is an intrinsic motivator for one is going to be different for another person. But
Yeah.
if everybody's driven because they feel good about themselves, they feel that, and that's part of like, why am I producing for this company? I feel good about the goals I'm achieving. I feel good about the contribution I'm making to the success of the company. Those are all intrinsic drivers that
Hmm.
when you play on those, you create a positive employee experience, which leads to people wanting to do more.
Hmm.
But once I get that new car, once I get that trip, then I'm driving for the next one. So, and I'm never going to be happy. I'm
Hmm.
always going to be like I'm always working towards something I can't achieve because the prize keeps getting moved on me. It's that moving target you can't hit, but people feel
Hmm.
it motivates people. It doesn't. I don't think it does anyhow.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do we make changes? Like, what are some changes that companies can make to improve their conversations? I also remember one time getting a performance review from someone I didn't even report to. And I was so confused by that because I was like, you don't even know the work that I'm doing. We don't work together at all. And I don't know. I found that interesting as well.
Yeah, I think that we have to stop treating performance reviews as a year end summary and verdict. It's like
Mm.
the jury coming out with its, have you reached a verdict? What's the
Yeah,
verdict on my
performance review
success?
time, and everyone goes, "Oh my God."
I think that people have to be have these continuous conversations for improvement, that they have to have the check-ins on a regular basis, feed forward instead of feedback, keep the eye on success so they work for success. They don't work
Hmm.
for, okay, I can't do that because my boss doesn't like it, but I'm going to do this because I want to do this. So they have to have real conversations about ideas and suggestions that are going to make them successful. They should be so the year end is not a verdict, it's simply a summary of the conversations combined with how you did against your goals, how you behaved during the year. But that's been discussed all year. Adjustments have been made according to the changing goals or the moving targets. And therefore, it would not be a surprise.
Hmm.
So, instead of catching people doing something wrong, try to catch people doing something right. And as a
Hmm.
result of that, we focus on what makes people move towards accountability, towards ownership, and towards pride in the work they're doing.
Hmm. And the only way people are going to take responsibility is if the leaders are taking responsibility and showing integrity and doing what they say.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because one of the areas I work in is accountability and commitment. And managers always complain, how come my staff is not taking accountability? And I laugh and say, when I talk to the staff, they're saying, why doesn't the manager take accountability? And if they don't take accountability, why do they want me to take accountability? So
Yeah.
that's one thing. The other thing on these performance reviews that are really um, has become popular, which is sad, is 360 feedback, multi-source feedback has become part of many performance reviews, which is sort of the lazy way out for managers because they see how their peers, their direct reports see this person, and it might be different than how they see the person. Uh, if the person is not liked, they can collude to give them a bad review. Uh, there's so many things. 360 is designed for development only. It's not designed in a way that is to give person a performance review because the way they were behaving 4 months ago when that was taken, if the manager's doing their job right, the person is improving, can be completely different today than it was then. So,
Mm.
yes, managers can very well during this process of finding how do I get them to focus on the right behaviors, talk to their peers, find out, what is happening, and then work with them towards the desired behavior. But to take this, 360 is a point in time, and it's not a progress review because it's not done frequently enough. And it's once a year, and there's so many other conditions that are involved in it that it just isn't right that they become part of performance reviews. But when some of these consulting firms or firms that do these 360 tell organizations with great enthusiasm that 360 is a great way of doing performance reviews, organizations believe it and they do it. When in fact, the research shows and reality shows 360 should not be part of a performance review.
Remind everybody just briefly what 360 means. We did an episode on this prior, so people can go back and listen to that episode, but just briefly.
360 is basically a full circle view of how you're doing by the people that you do it with. So
Mm.
it's feedback from your boss, it's feedback from your peers. You do a self analysis, your direct reports, if you have them, your um, customers or suppliers, internal or external if you have them. So you get a full circle view of on a certain set of behaviors, how you're doing.
Okay, perfect. So, tell us more about what you do, David.
What do I do? I work with organizations in the area of behaviors. I work with organizations in helping them define understand their authentic culture, what makes them successful, and what are the values that are the foundation for that, and the behaviors that drive those values, because it's the behaviors that need to be defined. I work with integrating that and behaviors within jobs into selection, hiring, behavioral interviewing. My book, Selecting the Best, is, right there. Thank you. It is about how to do that successfully. As we're talking about how to integrate this discussion of behaviors and outcomes into performance reviews, how to integrate it into succession planning, leadership development, about behaviors. That's the kind of stuff I do. And I've written 3 books. That one of them that's a new one. I also do conferences, speak at conferences. I'll be speaking this year at the SHRM Talent on my on related to my book in Dallas, and I'm also doing a pre-conference at SHRM Annual in Orlando on the employee experience and why the employee experience drives success and drives the employee engagement.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today and for chatting all things performance reviews. Do you have any last minute thoughts or advice for anyone listening?
Yeah, make the performance a continuous improvement process. Focus on what they can do to be successful. Don't focus on what they didn't do, and don't ask them why they did what they weren't supposed to do, which makes them defensive. Leave the word why for your behavioral interviews and take them out of your performance reviews, and make it a process where you understand what are the intrinsic motivators of people and build off those intrinsics. Like you said, give them that day off, which is more value than a $500 bonus. So those are the kinds of things. Focus on success and focus on helping people feel pride in the work they do.
Thank you so much for this forward thinking conversation. I look forward to the next one.
Yes, so do I.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in. We will have David's website in the show notes so you can check out more of his work and links to his books, which include Selecting the Best, which you can see behind my shoulder here on the shelf. So until next time, take care, everybody.